When my daughter-in-law slammed the door in my face, she didn't realize she was closing the chapter on her comfortable illusions and opening one she wouldn't be able to control. It was a rainy Saturday when I showed up at my son's house. I hadn't seen my grandkids in nearly 4 months. Birthdays had passed, holidays skipped, all under the pretense of too much going on. But I missed them. So I baked their favorite cinnamon bread and took the hour-long bus ride with my aching knees and all. I barely had time to knock before Melanie opened the door. Her expression tightened the moment she saw me standing there, holding a wrapped loaf in both hands like a peace offering. She didn't even say hello. "Why are you here?" she asked, blocking the doorway. "I just wanted to surprise the kids," I said. "It's been so long. I thought maybe I could." "No," she cut in sharply. "You can't just show up uninvited. We don't live like that." I looked past her shoulder, hoping to catch a glimpse of little Eli or Clara, but the hallway was quiet. No tiny footsteps running toward Grandma. No squeals of excitement. Just the cold, pale silence of a house that used to be warm. She stepped outside and pulled the door nearly shut behind her. "Sarah, look," she sighed, her voice dropping into that polished tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. "You need to understand something. You walking around in your thrift store shoes and old lady cardigan doesn't exactly give the right example for the kids." I blinked. "Excuse me? I don't want them growing up thinking it's okay to be poor. That it's admirable to live like that. They need to see ambition, success. Not someone who couldn't even afford a car." Her words sank like stones, each one heavier than the last. But I didn't let her see me crumble. "You're saying I'm a bad influence because I'm not rich?" "I'm saying," she whispered harshly, "I don't want them thinking it's okay to end up like you. You don't belong here anymore. And if you care about them, you won't come around." She turned and went back inside. The door clicked shut. Not slammed, but deliberate. Final. I stood there in the rain with the cinnamon loaf pressed to my chest, its warmth already fading. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, the one with one uneven leg and 3 chairs that don't match, and I made a list. Melanie thought she was talking to a broke old woman in second-hand shoes. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that after retiring at 58, I turned my lifelong hobby into a business. A secret business. Baking. It started with neighbors, then local cafes. Within 3 years, I was supplying to 12 cafes, for restaurants, and had 2 full-time employees handling orders under my LLC. I never told anyone. I didn't need to. I lived simply. Saved. Reinvested. I wanted to build a legacy in silence. Leave something behind. Until now. Melanie didn't want a poor old woman visiting her children? Fine. Then let's see how she reacts when I buy a 7-bedroom estate, throw a housewarming, and drive up in a Porsche convertible wearing a coat that costs more than her wedding dress. Let the games begin. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, though I was, but because something inside me had shifted. Something quiet, patient, and razor-sharp. I spent the early hours drafting a list of things to do. Not just out of spite. Out of precision. By 7 a.m., I was already on the phone with Nadine, my kitchen manager. "We're doubling production. Starting this week." She paused. "Are you sure?" "I'm beyond sure. Since retiring, I'd poured everything I had into my bakery business, Cinnabel's Secret. I had a commercial kitchen hidden in a nondescript warehouse off Belmont Street. No public storefront, no advertising. Everything was built on word of mouth and exclusivity. My logo was a gold S inside a cinnamon swirl, no mention of my name. Customers paid up front, and my name never touched the receipts. They just knew someone baked with a skill they couldn't find in chain stores. I wore cheap clothes and lived in a rented duplex for one reason: silence was power. But Melanie's words ignited something different in me. I no longer wanted silence. I wanted spectacle. So I called Mark, my real estate agent, and said 5 words I'd been waiting to say. "It's time. Show me everything." We toured 3 properties that same week. The third one was perfect. A gated Spanish-style mansion on a hill with arched doorways, hand-painted tiles, and a kitchen that could host a Michelin chef's fantasy. 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, panoramic views. The driveway curved like a question mark and ended at a circular fountain that practically screamed money. I bought it on the spot. Full cash payment. Mark blinked. Do you want to discuss financing? No need. And that was just step one. 3 weeks later, I walked into the dealership in the same gray cardigan Melanie had once mocked. I pointed at the ruby red Porsche convertible on display. The salesman took one look at my thrift store outfit and started offering me brochures for used SUVs. I'll take that one, I said, tapping the Porsche. Ma'am, that model starts at. I said that one. Wrap it in a bow. I'm driving it off today. I left with the top down, the engine growling as I pulled out of the lot like an old woman with nothing to lose. Because now, I had everything. And then came the invitations. I had them custom printed, thick, embossed cardstock with gold trim and cursive lettering. You are cordially invited to a private housewarming dinner at the residence of Sarah Whitmore. Black tie. No children. No photographers. Phones will be checked at the door. You'll want to see this. I sent one to Melanie and my son, of course. I made sure it was hand-delivered. The kind of delivery that arrives in a sleek black envelope with a wax seal. And just in case Melanie thought she could ignore it, I had a second one sent to her office. Her assistant called to confirm within hours. She'd be coming. Good. Because I had something very special planned. 2 days before the party, Melanie called me. Not my son, Melanie. I didn't answer. Let her stew in her own curiosity. Let her wonder why the woman she dismissed like a street beggar was now hosting an exclusive, adults-only housewarming in a mansion she'd never heard of. She didn't leave a voicemail. She didn't need to. I could practically hear her voice through the screen. How the hell is she affording this? The night of the party arrived quickly. I dressed deliberately. A floor-length midnight blue gown that shimmered under light like 1,000 crushed sapphires. Simple diamond studs. And yes, shoes custom-made by the same designer Melanie bragged about on Instagram last spring. Mine were a newer release. When I stepped into the foyer of my new home that evening, the place looked like a spread from an architectural magazine. My staff, yes, staff, greeted guests with champagne flutes. A string quartet played softly near the stone fireplace. Flickering candles lined the staircase, leading up to balconies and polished corridors. And then they arrived. My son, trying to hide his awe, wearing a suit I could tell hadn't been tailored. Melanie? She walked in like a queen. Until she actually looked around. Her jaw tensed. Her steps slowed. I stepped forward, glass in hand. Melanie, I said smoothly. Welcome. Her eyes raked over my dress. Her smile faltered just slightly. This is nice. Isn't it? I replied, turning on my heel and walking away. I didn't offer a tour. I didn't offer explanation. She could figure it out like the rest of them. Dinner was served under a chandelier from Vienna, imported the week before. As guests marveled at the table setting, the curated wines, and the French chef-crafted entrees, I took the seat at the head of the table. My son sat to my right, Melanie to my left. I watched her squirm through every toast. Every comment about, how long have you lived here, and, Sarah, you've been keeping secrets. I leaned in, finally, and whispered, how's the rug your dog sleeps on? She blinked. Because this dress, I added, motioning to the one I wore, cost more than that rug. And your earrings. Combined. I smiled. Gently. Politely. And turned back to the table. What Melanie didn't know was that this wasn't the climax. This was just the appetizer. Because while she was sipping wine and trying to keep her composure, I had a little post-dinner presentation planned. One that involved a projector. And her name on the screen. As the dessert trays were cleared, lavender creme brulee and pistachio tarts served on platinum-trimmed china, I gave a nod to Helen, my house manager. She knew the cue. The dining room lights dimmed slightly. A screen lowered silently from the ceiling, and the soft clink of spoons gave way to murmurs of curiosity. I hope you'll indulge me, I said, standing with a gentle tap of my glass. I prepared something special. A little visual journey about where I've been, and how I got here. Melanie went still. Good. The screen lit up. The first slide was simple, an old photo of me, hair pinned in rollers, kneading dough in my cramped kitchen. The year was 2019. I looked tired, plain, and unremarkable. After retiring, I didn't travel. I didn't rest. I baked. I sold cinnamon bread from my apartment and walked to the post office with orders because I didn't have a car. Slide 2. The same kitchen, now refitted with stainless steel counters and industrial ovens. Boxes labeled for shipment. A clipboard of invoices on the wall. I paused. No one knew. I kept it hidden. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to build something before anyone had the chance to tell me I couldn't. Slide 3. Graphs. Sales numbers. Expansion contracts. The name, Cinnabel's Secret, projected in delicate gold cursive. A wave of whispers swept the table. My guests were putting it together. Yes, I said, smiling. That exclusive pastry brand all over the city? That's mine. 12 restaurants. 4 bakeries. And now, a 5-year contract with a national distributor. We go live in November. Melanie's fork slid off her plate. Slide 4. A high-resolution photo of the estate. My estate. Taken at sunset, drone angle, golden light bathing the red-tiled roof. And finally, slide 5. A close-up of the Porsche's dashboard. Digital readout, keys and ignition. Melanie's name, printed clearly on the original invite in the cup holder. I was told once, I said, locking eyes with her, that I shouldn't come visit my grandchildren because I was poor. That I might set a bad example. I let the silence breathe. I agreed. I won't set a bad example. I'll set a new standard. The room burst into applause. Melanie didn't clap. She didn't speak. She just stared at the screen as if it had slapped her across the face. I sat back down, sipped my wine, and leaned toward her once more. Just wait until you see the rug I bought for the dog's room. It's Persian. I smiled softly. And this time, her hands actually trembled. Melanie didn't speak for the rest of the evening. She smiled mechanically, her eyes darting from guest to guest, avoiding mine, avoiding the screen, avoiding herself. My son, bless his spineless heart, just kept his mouth shut and refilled his wine glass like it was an oxygen tank. But I wasn't done. After the final course, guests were led out to the veranda for digestives and conversation under the stars. A harpist played softly beside the fountain. That's when Helen brought out the gift bags. Black velvet, sealed with gold wax, each one labeled with a name tag embossed in silver foil. Inside, a glass jar of my cinnamon spread, a custom keychain in the shape of a swirl, a handwritten card thanking them for coming, and a voucher for a private bakery tasting experience. Every bag identical, except Melanie's. I made sure hers was different. She opened it away from others, behind one of the pillars, just near enough for me to catch the moment when her face changed. Instead of the cinnamon spread, she found a framed photo. It was taken 2 years ago. Christmas morning. She was unwrapping the earrings she'd bragged about at brunch that day. The same ones she'd claimed were custom commissioned from Europe. The ones she laughed about me never being able to afford. The photo zoomed in just enough to show the gift tag still attached. To Melanie, with love from Sarah. She had regifted what I gave her. Bragged about it as if she bought it herself. Underneath the photo frame, I had tucked the original receipt. From the boutique in Florence. Paid in full. My name on the invoice. She found me a moment later, red-faced but composed, the photo in one hand. What is this supposed to be? She whispered sharply. I tilted my head. A memory. You planned this whole thing to humiliate me. No, I said calmly. You did that all on your own. I just decided to stop making it easy. She blinked. Now, I added, would you like to see the dog's rug? It's in the lounge. Imported cashmere blend. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the exit. Guests noticed, of course. Whispers swelled. I didn't stop her. Let her run. Because what came next would be even harder for her to outrun. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I already had 3 voicemails, 2 from Melanie, 1 from my son. None of them I answered. I wanted them to stew in it, let the embarrassment soak until it started to itch. But I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I made myself a French press coffee and walked barefoot across the heated floors of my sunroom. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, hitting the marble just right. That's when my lawyer texted, "Delivery confirmed. Documentation logged. You'll receive copies today." I smiled. The real show was just beginning. Melanie had humiliated me because of status. Because I didn't look successful. Because to her, money meant power and image. So I decided to speak to her in the only language she understood, visibility. By noon, every vendor and partner of Cinnabel's Secret received an official press release. I gave my first public interview, nothing flashy, just a quiet exposé in a boutique food magazine detailing how a retired widow turned her grief into a bakery empire. The article ran with a photograph, me in my garden, flower-dusted apron, Portia in the background, mansion behind me. The title read, "The Silent Millionaire Behind the Bread Craze." But I made sure one particular detail stood out. A note at the end, MS. Whitmore is preparing a private foundation to support women over 60 launching businesses from home. She hopes to inspire those who've been told they're too old or too poor to begin again. Melanie saw it. Of course she did. She texted me at 3:14 p.m. "So you were hiding money this whole time? Are you serious?" And then again. "You lied to us." I waited a full hour before replying. "No, dear. I just never corrected your assumptions." That's not lying. That's surviving. At 5:30, my son showed up. He hadn't been to my new house since the party. He stood awkwardly at the front gate, pressing the intercom. "It's me. Can we talk?" I watched him on the camera feed. Disheveled. Nervous. Less like the man I raised, more like the boy who used to panic when he broke a window playing baseball. I let him in. Because he hadn't said what Melanie did. Not yet. He stepped inside like he didn't belong. Like he was visiting someone else's world. Which, in a way, he was. My son, Matthew, stood in the entryway, looking up at the vaulted ceiling, the arched windows, the curated artwork, the crystal chandelier that shimmered even in soft light. He looked down at the polished marble floor, then at me. Eyes confused. Hesitant. "You changed your number," he said. "No," I replied. "I changed who I answer to." That threw him off, but I didn't care. I motioned for him to follow me into the parlor. Coffee already brewed. A plate of lemon scones rested beside a stack of legal envelopes. He didn't sit right away. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. "About the business. The money. Any of it. Would it have mattered?" I asked calmly. "You let your wife talk to me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out of her life. You watched her slam doors, exclude me from holidays, insult me to my face. And you never said a word. I didn't know it was that bad. You didn't ask." He sat down then. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't stand under the weight of it anymore. "You made us look like fools, Mom." I tilted my head. "No. Melanie made herself look like a fool. You just stood next to her long enough that the shadow caught you too." He rubbed his hands together. "An old nervous habit. She's freaking out. I imagine she is. She keeps saying this was all some setup. That you did it to punish her. Did I ever insult her? No, but did I ever throw her out of my house?" He didn't answer. I continued. "I was building something for you. For the kids. A legacy. I kept it quiet because I wanted to give, not prove. But your wife forced me to prove it." I slid one of the envelopes across the table. "This is the first step. A trust fund. One for Eli, one for Clara. They'll get access at 25. He blinked. "You're still giving us money?" "I'm giving them a future. Not you. Not her. The trust is legally sealed. Neither of you can touch a cent." His face flushed. A strange mix of shame and relief. "And this," I added, passing another envelope, "is yours." He opened it. A notarized letter. No money. Just words. "You are no longer the executor of my estate. You chose silence. Now you'll have to live with it." He looked up. Angry. Then devastated. "But I'm your son." "Yes," I said, standing up. "And I hope one day that will mean something again." He left without another word. He didn't even finish his coffee. I watched him from the upstairs window as he got into his car. Parked beside my Porsche, his modest sedan looked like a relic from a life I'd outgrown. Or maybe one I had quietly outpaced years ago, while he was too busy listening to his wife's opinions about my grocery store shoes. Once his taillights disappeared down the hill, I finally exhaled. The next morning, my lawyer visited. I had two objectives: revise my will and launch the charitable foundation I mentioned in the interview. We sat in my office, formerly the billiard room, now reimagined into a light-filled command center with white oak desks and floor-to-ceiling shelves stacked with bakery test journals and binders full of vendor contracts. He reviewed the trust language for my grandchildren. No provisions for your son or daughter-in-law? I shook my head. My son needs to remember who raised him, not who styled him. He didn't argue. We moved on to the foundation. I had it all outlined. Name: The Rising Oven. Purpose: grants for women over 60 starting home-based businesses. First-year budget: $1. 2 million. Launch date: September 1st. And you're funding this personally? He asked. With pleasure. By noon, news of the trust had already reached Melanie. She called twice. Texted once. We should be in charge of that money. You don't know what you're doing. I replied with a single sentence. You didn't want my poverty near your children. Now you won't get near their wealth. She didn't respond. That weekend, the local business journal ran a follow-up piece on my story. Not about the bakery, but the foundation. It featured an interview with one of the first grant recipients, a 72-year-old widow from a nearby town who was using her grant to open a food truck with her late husband's chili recipe. It ended with a quote from me. They said I was too old and too poor to matter. I prefer to build proof instead of arguments. On Monday morning, I received a hand-delivered letter. From Melanie. Written in elegant handwriting, her name signed with a flourish like it belonged on a perfume bottle. The note was short. I hope you're proud of yourself. You've ruined everything. I took the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into a drawer. Then I opened my laptop and started designing invitations for the next event. A gala. Fundraiser. Theme: From Oven to Empire. And this time, nobody from their house would make it past the front gate. The gala was to be held at my estate. I hired a planner from New York, someone who specialized in legacy events, whatever that meant. All I told her was this: it must be elegant. But more importantly, it must be unforgettable. We scheduled it for 6 weeks out. Invitations were hand-pressed, gold-edged, with RSVP QR codes tied to verified names. This wasn't a dinner party anymore. This was a declaration. The theme: From Oven to Empire, a celebration of silent power. We sent the first wave of invitations to female entrepreneurs, local business owners, restaurateurs I had supplied for years in secret. The second wave went to media outlets, small, trustworthy ones. I didn't need tabloids. I needed truth. The third wave? It went to every person who had ever looked at me like I was less. Including Melanie's mother. Yes, her mother. She once told me at a barbecue that raising children on a retired person's budget was a form of unintentional child neglect. She RSVP'd within an hour. Melanie didn't receive an invitation at all. But of course, she found out. 4 days before the event, I received an email. Subject: Mistake on guest list. Message: Hi Sarah. It appears I didn't receive my invitation to the gala. I'm assuming it was lost in the mail? Let me know. I'll RSVP immediately. I didn't respond. 3 hours later, another message. Subject: Clarification. I saw the RSVP page. I wasn't on the list. This must be some kind of oversight. I'm Eli and Clara's mother. You're creating a trust in their name. We are family. This is humiliating. This time I responded. 2 words. Access denied. The day before the gala, she showed up at my gate. Dressed like she was stepping onto a red carpet, she buzzed the intercom. This is a mistake, she said to the camera. You can't seriously keep me out. This is your event. I pressed the speaker button. You made it clear you didn't want to be associated with poverty. Now I'm wealthy enough to be selective. And I'm selecting people who respected me before the Porsche. She stood there stunned. Then stormed back to her car without another word. I watched the cameras as her taillights disappeared. Then I turned to my planner. Raise the perimeter screens. I don't want her seeing a single flicker of this party. The gala was flawless. Ballet attendants in black suits lined the circular driveway. Spotlights lit the path up the hill. Inside, live jazz swirled through the air. The main ballroom was draped in cream silk and cinnamon brown velvet, the scent of fresh pastries wafting from the display kitchens. Guests wore gowns and tuxedos. I wore gold. Not jewelry, a dress. Tailored silk, flowing and commanding, the exact shade of a fresh-baked cinnamon roll crust. It was intentional. Everything was. The night wasn't just about food or wealth. It was about power repurposed. We auctioned off personalized pastry boxes for charity. Each box came with a one-on-one baking session in my kitchen and a signed recipe from this secret collection. They sold out in 30 minutes. One box went for $19,000. My keynote speech came at 9 p.m. I stepped onto the stage beneath a projection of the original Cinnabelle logo, that gold swirl, quiet and regal. 2 years ago, I was told to stay away from my own grandchildren. That I was too poor, too embarrassing, too invisible. Silence. I chose not to argue. I chose to work. To build. To wait. I scanned the room. And tonight, I don't need to prove anything. Because power doesn't scream. It waits. Bakes. Rises. Applause. Not polite, thunderous. After the speech, a well-dressed man from a luxury food group approached me with a proposal. Have you ever considered a flagship retail location? I smiled. Not yet. But I'm open to discussion. He handed me his card. I tucked it into my clutch beside the RSVP log, the one that still didn't have Melanie's name on it. When the event ended just after midnight, I stood alone by the main window, looking out over the dark hills. I wasn't angry anymore. Not hurt. Not proving anything. I was ready. The empire wasn't just alive. It was expanding. And Melanie? She wasn't even on the map anymore. 2 days after the gala, I received a text from my son. Not a call. Just a short, shaky text. We need to talk. Something happened. I ignored it. By that evening, he showed up again, no warning, standing at the front gate like a man who'd lost something important but couldn't say what. I let him in. He looked worse than last time. Wrinkled shirt. Loose tie. The kind of weariness that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from living with someone unraveling. Melanie is furious, he started. She's often furious. She called my boss. I blinked. Excuse me? He rubbed his forehead. She tried to have me transferred to the Texas office. Said we needed to rebuild away from public humiliation. Said your antics are making her a joke in her circles. I almost laughed. Instead, I sipped my coffee. And what did you say to that? I told her no, he said. That this is your success and she doesn't get to rewrite it. I studied him for a long time. Why the change? He hesitated. Then pulled something from his pocket, a folded sheet of notebook paper. I found this in Eli's backpack. I unfolded it. A drawing. Crayons. A tall woman in a big dress with a red car, 2 kids standing beside her. A house with 5 windows and trees. The label at the top, Grandma's Castle. My throat tightened. He told his teacher that when he grows up, he wants to be rich like Grandma, not like Mommy and Daddy. Because Grandma built it herself. I looked up and saw something new in my son's face. Not just guilt. Pride. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But I see it now. What she did. What I let her do. And I want to fix it. For me. For the kids. I nodded slowly. You can start by being a father. Not a bystander. I will. He left not long after, quieter than before, but less hollow. And for the first time in years, I believed him. Later that night, I opened a new document on my laptop. Revised Inheritance Draft V2. And at the bottom of the page, under a fresh clause marked Conditional Reinstatement, I typed one name. Matthew Whitmore. And under Melanie Whitmore? No access. Irrevocable. Permanent. The decision to ban Melanie from my estate, my trust, my legacy, was not emotional. It was strategic. That's what people like her never understand. They confuse silence with submission. But I had never been passive. I had simply been planning. And now that the plans were in motion, I had no intention of slowing down. The next week, Melanie attempted to storm my front gate. Literally. She came with a clipboard, sunglasses, and some kind of self-importance that was embarrassing to witness on the security camera feed. When the gate guards asked her business, she waved papers and shouted, "I'm family. I demand access. You can't keep me out." She was holding a binder labeled Estate Review. I nearly choked on my tea. The guards followed protocol. Calmly and without confrontation, they declined her entry and called me. "Would you like us to escort her off the premises?" the head guard asked. "No need," I said. "Just take her photo and log her time of visit." Click. Snapshot taken. Melanie, mouth open mid-scream, hair askew from the wind, standing in front of a black iron gate that wasn't opening for her. I printed that image later that evening and placed it into a gold frame on my bookshelf, right next to a picture of my first loaf of cinnamon bread. From dirt floor to velvet rug. She was never going to understand it. 3 days later, I received a letter from her attorney. A formal request. On behalf of Mrs. Melanie Whitmore, we request a discussion regarding the management of the grandchildren's trust and her access to said estate as the children's legal guardian. I scanned it, then penned a forward response. Request denied. Irrevocable structure. Enclosed with my reply? A copy of the drawing Eli made, labeled Grandma's Castle. Let them chew on that. Meanwhile, my foundation's email inbox was overflowing. Women from all over the country had seen the article, read the follow-up story, watched the short interview clip that had gone viral online. I had applications from widows, divorcees, retirees, all with quiet dreams of baking, crafting, designing, growing, rebuilding. I hired a full-time team to help vet and fund the best ideas. The Rising Oven was no longer just a name. It was a movement. And I was no longer someone's discarded mother-in-law. I was a founder, a builder, a matriarch of momentum. And there was no Melanie-shaped shadow large enough to eclipse that now. The night after Melanie's lawyer received my response, my phone rang. Private number. It rang again, then again, and again. 17 calls in the span of one evening. I didn't answer a single one. She followed with a text. "You're destroying this family." I set the phone down and finished my tea. Because the truth was, the family had been breaking for years. I'd just stopped cushioning the fall. The next morning, I called my PR advisor. "Yes, I have one now. Let's take this public," I said. "Not the drama. The story." She asked what I meant. I said, "I want to start a podcast. A short-run series. Stories of women like me. Retired, overlooked, and building something incredible in silence." She loved it. We titled it, After 60, Still Rising. The pilot episode? My story. I told it plainly. No theatrics. No villain names. Just the arc, the disrespect, the quiet build, the moment of refusal, and the rise that followed. We released it at midnight on a Sunday. By Tuesday, it had 1.3 million listens. That afternoon, I got a message from Clara's teacher. Clara, my youngest granddaughter, had brought a cinnamon swirl to class in a pink tin and told her teacher, "My grandma makes the best ones in the world. She's famous. But not the TV kind. The real kind." That message? It did what no insult could ever undo. It made every ounce of restraint, every silent year, every long night in a tiny kitchen, worth it. Meanwhile, Melanie went quiet. Not because she was done fighting. Because she was regrouping. But she didn't know something crucial. While she was plotting how to reclaim power, I was already building the next phase of the empire. And this time, it wasn't going to be just about baking. It was going to be about buying. I never planned to expand beyond the kitchen. But something shifted the day I toured the old Marigold Market property on Halton Avenue. A once thriving space now boarded up, its windows dusty with time and silence. The realtor smiled politely when I asked about buying it in full. "Are you sure, Ms. Whitmore? This place needs a lot of work." I turned, smiled just as politely, and said, "So did I." Within 2 weeks, I owned it. The renovation team came in the next day. It wasn't just going to be a bakery. It was going to be a movement in stone. The Rising Oven Cafe and Women's Incubator. A place for female founders over 50 to sell their goods. To meet, mentor, and multiply. One side of the building would be full retail. The other? A shared kitchen, rentable booths, and a small office space for business planning help. Every square inch of the building was going to hum with second chances. Melanie must have heard the news. The cafe made the local paper. A full-page piece. Widow-turned-mogul Sarah Whitmore expands into community uplift. Her response came via a group email to the family chain, one she hadn't used in months. Subject: we should talk about the kids. Message: hi everyone. I think it's time we regrouped. The kids are asking questions. We're all still family. Let's sit down and work out how to move forward for their sake. I nearly laughed. That wasn't concern. That was optics. But I didn't reply, because 2 days later, I had a better way to answer her. The cafe held a private soft launch for grant recipients and family. I invited Matthew. He brought Eli and Clara. Melanie was not on the list. Eli ran to hug me before he even made it through the door. Grandma, this is your store? Clara gasped at the glass cases of sweets. Matthew looked around quietly, hands in pockets, like he still wasn't sure where he stood. I leaned over and whispered to my grandson, "Want to help me cut the ribbon?" His face lit up. Cameras flashed. Reporters clicked. And in every photo, every headline, every smiling frame, Melanie was nowhere to be found. By the time the official grand opening rolled around, I had interviews booked through October. Business magazines, morning shows, even a podcast network offered a series based on my transformation. But none of it felt quite like that moment during the ribbon cutting when Eli held the oversized gold scissors and asked, "Grandma, when I'm older, can I open a cinnamon store too?" I crouched beside him, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Sweetheart, you can build an empire. And I'll help you every step of the way." Melanie couldn't overwrite that. Not anymore. She'd been erased from the narrative, not out of spite, but because she never earned a page in it. 2 weeks after the launch, Melanie tried her boldest move yet. She sent a formal petition, through her lawyer, to request co-management access to the Children's Trust, claiming her role as their primary emotional guardian warranted financial participation. I replied through my own attorney. 2 words. Petition denied. She followed it up with a veiled threat. A letter suggesting she'd be sharing the full family story in an online op-ed. She probably expected me to panic. Instead, I sent her a package. Inside? A beautifully wrapped cinnamon loaf, tied with a satin ribbon. And a note. "Make sure you spell my name correctly when you fail to bury it." The story never ran. I'm sure she wrote it. I'm sure she reread it. But it didn't make it past her own reflection. Because no one would believe it now. Not after what came next. The city council nominated me for a civic award, Businesswoman of the Year. Not for the bakery. Not for the money. But for restoring dignity and independence to underrepresented women in the second half of life. They asked me to speak at the ceremony. I agreed. But only on one condition. That the event serve food from the Rising Oven Incubator booths. Every woman I funded would be there. Front and center. And the press? Would cover them too. Because while Melanie tried to discredit me, I was already building the future without her. The award ceremony was held at the governor's mansion. Velvet invitations. State press coverage. A hall filled with polished officials and people who once walked past me like I was invisible. I wore silver that night. Not flashy. Not screaming. Just elegant, tailored, and powerful like armor sewn from patience. The Rising Oven catered the entire menu. Spiced apple pastries from Linda, a 74-year-old widow who'd spent 2 decades baking in church basements. Jamaican meat pies from Darlene, a retired nurse who'd finally opened her own food stand after 20 years of saying someday. Lavender shortbreads from a woman who used to scrub offices at night while dreaming about her grandmother's recipe book. Each of them stood beside their dish. Guests raved. Photos were taken. And every woman smiled like she finally belonged in the room. When it was time for my speech, I walked up slowly, the applause rising. I looked around and spotted my son in the second row. He clapped harder than anyone else. Eli and Clara were beside him, grinning. Melanie? Nowhere in sight. Exactly as it should be. I adjusted the mic. There was a time when people told me I had no business taking up space, I said. That I was too poor, too old, too irrelevant to shape anything meaningful. And for a while, I believed them. A pause. But then someone said something I couldn't forget. We don't want you around our children. You're a bad example. I let the silence sit. Then smiled. So I decided to become the kind of example they'd never stop talking about. Laughter. Applause. But tonight isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. Of time. Of dignity. Of voice. I turned to the women behind the food tables. And we're just getting started. Afterward, dozens lined up to shake my hand. A young woman said, I sent your podcast to my mom. She started baking again. A man in a crisp suit said, my mother cried when she saw your story. She thought she was too late. Now she's launching a home business. It didn't just feel like a win. It felt like restoration. Back at the mansion, alone in my quiet lounge, I poured a glass of wine and turned on the security app. One alert from earlier. A camera ping from the back fence. A figure in heels, standing just outside the perimeter. Melanie. No movement. No note. No attempt to get in. Just standing. Staring up at the mansion from below. Watching. Knowing. She missed her moment. And now? She was witnessing mine. She stood at the edge of the back fence for 7 minutes. 7. I watched from the live camera feed. Melanie didn't shout. Didn't move. Didn't even try to get in. She just looked. Up the hill. At the glow of the event lights still on. The reflection of the fountain dancing on marble. The curtains drawn back just enough for her to see people moving freely through rooms she'd never be invited to. Rooms she had once decided I wasn't good enough to step into. Now she couldn't even touch the gate. And that was better than any insult I could have ever delivered. The next morning, I had the back fence heightened. Not out of fear. Out of finality. The guards were instructed, she is not a threat, but she is a boundary breach. Keep the boundary. And boundaries, I've learned, are the most luxurious thing wealth can buy, especially after a lifetime of being expected to have none. That same day, I received a call from the board of a National Women's Business Alliance. They'd voted unanimously to offer me a seat as an honorary advisor. I accepted. A month later, I'd sit in on my first meeting. But this morning, something else happened. I got a message from Clara's teacher. They were doing a classroom project on family businesses. Clara had drawn a huge picture of my bakery. But this time, she added something new. Stick figures beside me. Little girls in aprons. One holding a sign that said, "We bake too." Her teacher had asked, "Are those your cousins?" And Clara had said, "No. Those are the ladies Grandma helps." They didn't have big houses before, but now they're building castles too. Later that evening, I printed out that drawing. Framed it in gold. Hung it beside the photo of Eli's grandma's castle. 2 legacy pieces. 2 children already seeing the power of quiet work and loud values. No luxury purse, no gated brunch, no passive-aggressive insult from Melanie could compete with that. And speaking of Melanie, her silence didn't last. She was planning something. I could sense it. But she hadn't realized by now I didn't react. I preempted. And her next move would be her last. It came as a whisper first. A mutual acquaintance, a former friend of Melanie's, slid into my email inbox with a vague subject line, "Thought you should know." The message was short. Melanie's planning a feature. A redemption piece. She wants to set the record straight and tell her side before your name becomes completely untouchable. Wants sympathy. Probably hoping a news cycle rebalances the power. I stared at the screen. So this was it. Her final card, narrative manipulation. She didn't want truth. She wanted attention. A way to worm back into the center of the story she was never the author of. But I didn't panic. Because I already knew the exact counter. I'd already written it. That week, I submitted an exclusive op-ed to the biggest national magazine that had been courting me for months. Title: The Power of Being Uninvited, How Rejection Can Build Empires. It wasn't a takedown. No names. Just the story. A woman told she wasn't fit to be around her grandchildren because she was too poor. A widow who took that insult and baked her way into an empire. Quietly. Relentlessly. The op-ed ended with this line. You can spend your life asking to be let in, or you can build a house so grand, they beg you to let them near the gates. I chose the latter. When it published, it trended for 3 days straight. Melanie's story, if she even dared to publish it, wouldn't just get drowned. It would never even get printed. 2 days later, her publicist emailed mine with a withdrawal notice. She was reconsidering future media interactions and choosing to focus on family privacy, which meant she had realized there was no coming back. The press didn't want the villain's tears when the hero's oven was still warm with legacy. The next time I saw Melanie was by accident. At a grocery store of all places. She was pushing a cart. Alone. Hair tied back. No makeup. Not a single designer logo on her. We locked eyes for half a second. She looked away. Didn't approach. Didn't speak. She knew. Not just that I'd won, but that I never played the game she thought I had. I left the store with a smile. And an idea. It was time to write a book. A cookbook? No. A memoir. Rising after the fire, recipes, rejections, and the quiet building of power. Because Melanie had tried to erase me from one story. So I made sure she'd never have the power to touch mine again. Writing the book was the easiest part. I had already lived every sentence. Every insult, every loaf, every sleepless night rolling dough while my hands ached and the kitchen was too cold. Every quiet Sunday spent delivering orders instead of asking to be included in a brunch table I was never invited to. I wrote without exaggeration. Without venom. I didn't need either. The truth had aged well. Like proofed dough left overnight, rising stronger, richer. The publisher titled it, Rising After the Fire, Recipes, Rejections, and the Quiet Building of Power. Subtitle, From Mother-in-Law to Mogul in Cinnamon and Silence. The first chapter was titled, simply, Don't Come Around My Children. A direct quote from Melanie. I let it open the book not because I wanted revenge, but because it was the catalyst. The moment the match was lit. She wanted me out of her life. So I lit the path and walked out. Straight into legacy. When the advanced reader copy shipped, my team sent one to every major female business leader in the country. By week 2, Oprah's book club reached out. Week 3, I was booked on the Today Show. I didn't bring my children. I brought Eli and Clara. The producers had wanted to blur their faces. I refused. If she can try to define them in private, I said, they deserve to be seen in public, standing with the person who built their future. Eli wore a cinnamon swirl pin on his jacket. Clara handed the host a loaf she helped me bake the night before. The camera zoomed in. The host smiled. These recipes are powerful, she said. But it's the story underneath them that people are connecting to. I nodded once. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's structured. Baked. Served warm and irreversible. The day the book launched, it sold out in hours. 3 reprints in the first week. By the second, it had been translated into 4 languages. Bookstores began setting up displays labeled for the women they underestimated. I saw photos online of gray-haired ladies taking selfies beside my face. One caption read, "She's our patron saint now." I screenshotted every single one. Not out of ego. Out of proof. That I wasn't just a silent success story anymore. I was the blueprint. And Melanie? Still silent. Still watching. Still standing outside a story that moved on without her. She called me. It had been over a year since I'd heard her voice outside of security footage, lawyer correspondence, or muffled rage through a gate intercom. But that day, my phone rang. Caller ID, Melanie Whitmore. I let it ring. Once. Twice. Then I answered. Not because I owed her anything, but because I already owned everything. Hello. Her voice was lower. Not meek, not fake sweet. Just resigned. Hi, Sarah. I waited. She paused. I saw the book. Of course she did. And? Another pause. It's everywhere. Everyone's talking about it. About you. That tends to happen when truth ages well. Silence. Then. I deserved some of what you wrote. But not all of it. I laughed quietly. I didn't write about you, Melanie. I wrote around you. You're not a villain in the story. You're a footnote. That stung. She didn't deny it. I miss the kids, she said. They're thriving. I know. I see them online. She trailed off. You thought keeping them from me would elevate your image, I said. Instead, it erased you from theirs. More silence. Then finally, a question she never thought she'd ask. Can I come to the next event? Just quietly? I'll stay in the back. I just want to see them. I don't want to fight anymore. I let that hang in the air. Then answered the only way I could. No. But I'm not doing this out of vengeance. I'm doing it out of protection. For them. And for me. You don't get to injure people and ask for backstage passes to their recovery. She didn't argue. Didn't yell. She just sighed. The kind of sigh that sounds like a life deflating. I guess that's fair. Goodbye, Melanie. Click. I didn't feel triumph. Just peace. Not because she finally admitted defeat, but because I had reached a place where her voice didn't matter anymore. And that, in the end, was the ultimate conclusion. Not a confrontation. Not revenge. But irrelevance. That night, I took the framed photos of Eli and Clara's drawings and placed them inside a new glass case in my home library. Next to them, I added the first copy of my book. One display. 3 stories. All authored by me. All untouched by her. 6 months after the book launched, I got an invitation from the Smithsonian. They were curating a small exhibit on women entrepreneurs who redefined retirement. And they wanted one of my first handwritten recipe cards, the original cinnamon swirl loaf, along with a photo of my home kitchen where it all began. I sent both. But I also sent them something else. A letter, scrawled in my best cursive, that read, "This success was never born from spite. It was born from survival. The fire was theirs. The rise was mine." They framed it, placed it beside the recipe. The exhibit was titled, "She Didn't Start Over. She Started Better." Meanwhile, the Rising Oven Incubator expanded. 2 more storefronts opened in neighboring cities. Women flew in from 3 states just to apply for the grant. I hired a team of older women, retirees, veterans, former teachers, to mentor them. Because it was never just about cinnamon and cameras. It was about power returning to the hands that had been forced to let go too soon. Matthew began visiting more often. He stopped asking for anything. He just came. Sometimes with the kids. Sometimes alone. We would sit on the back veranda, drinking iced tea and watching the sun sink over the estate. And one day, very quietly, he said, "Thank you for still letting us in." I looked at him. You earned your way back in, I thought. But I just nodded and replied, legacy is not something you inherit. It's something you're invited to protect. He understood. That day, I changed one more line in the estate trust. Matthew's name was moved out of the conditional clause and into the active executor line. He didn't know it yet. He would. Someday. As for Melanie, she didn't try again. Not after that last phone call. She moved out of state a month later. Somewhere coastal, quiet, and out of reach. I assume she still follows my life online. The foundation. The accolades. The articles. But that's all she'll ever have now. A view from behind the glass. She taught me how painful silence could be. So I turned it into a luxury. One she can't afford anymore. With the 2nd anniversary of the Rising Oven approaching, my team suggested we hold a formal gala. Not a soft launch. Not a fundraiser. A true celebration. But I had one condition. I want a legacy wall, I told the event designer. A display that shows every woman who's come through this program. Their names, their businesses, their first wins. We built it on a curved wall at the heart of the flagship cafe. Portraits in gold-trimmed frames. Some candid, some professional, all proudly displayed beneath a sign that read, "Baked. Built. Belonging." There were 63 frames that first year. 63 women whose names had never once been in headlines, now presented like royalty. At the end of the wall, they placed one more frame. Mine. But I insisted it be different. No glamour shot. Just me, hair tied back, in my original apartment kitchen. Rolling dough. Elbow deep in flour. No makeup. No designer dress. Underneath it, a brass plate engraved. Started with silence. Ended with legacy. That wall brought people to tears. It brought me to something else. Closure. The night of the gala, Clara clung to my side like a shadow in satin. "Grandma," she whispered, "everyone says you're famous now." I leaned down, met her wide eyes. "No, sweetheart. I'm visible. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Fame fades. Legacy teaches." She smiled, showing a missing front tooth, and skipped off to show Eli the caramel bar tower near the buffet. I watched them for a long time. The children I almost lost access to, now growing up in the warmth of everything I'd built, with no shadows of shame trailing behind them. I was asked to give one more speech. I kept it short. To the women who thought they had missed their moment, you haven't. You were simply being underestimated long enough to surprise them. Applause. To the people who thought your time had passed, it hasn't. They just didn't see your clock. And lastly, to the ones who told you that you couldn't show your face, couldn't set an example, couldn't sit at their table, build your own. Set it with gold. And bake the meal so well, they have to watch you from the sidewalk. That night, long after the guests left, I stood alone by the legacy wall. I ran my hand along the edge of each frame. When I reached my own, I smiled and whispered, "You were worth everything they tried to bury." And I turned off the lights. The next time Melanie tried to reappear, it wasn't a confrontation. It was a gesture. A small, clumsy package arrived at the estate, no return address, hand-delivered by courier. Inside, a baby blue box tied with a pearl-white ribbon. Beneath the lid, a card in her unmistakable handwriting. For Clara. Belated birthday gift. No expectations. Just love. The gift? A child-sized Gucci purse. I stared at it for a full minute. Then took the card, shredded it slowly, and dropped the purse off at the donation center 5 minutes later. Because that's all it was now. A ghost in designer clothing, trying to claw its way back into a legacy that had sealed its gates long ago. I didn't even tell Clara. She didn't need to know. She didn't need to feel grateful for a person who once tried to erase her grandmother with a smile and a brunch menu. She didn't need a reminder of the cold hand that once slammed the door in my face and said, "Your presence will confuse them." What confused them now was how big Grandma's name had become. A week later, the foundation hosted a special grant summit for past winners. They came dressed not to impress, but to own the space. One arrived in a suit she bought from her first profit. Another in an apron stained with the batter she refused to hide anymore. I sat at the center table, watching them speak, exchange contacts, laugh like they'd known each other all their lives. And I realized, this was the family I had wanted all along. Built, not born. Chosen, not imposed. Respected, not tolerated. As the summit ended, I walked the halls of the cafe one last time before closing. That's when I saw the new addition my staff had hung without asking. A small framed photo above the kitchen entrance. A candid shot of me at the opening ceremony. Eli in my arms. Clara tugging at my sleeve. All of us laughing. Above the frame, in cursive lettering. Matriarch. Not CEO. Not founder. Not businesswoman. Matriarch. The one who held the family when others tried to splinter it. The one who baked her way back into view. The one whose rug was worth more than a name-brand apology. There are two types of inheritance. One that waits in a lawyer's office, dressed in numbers and bound by clauses. And one that's handed down in memory, thick with meaning, carried in silence, wrapped in the aroma of cinnamon and second chances. I decided to give both. My estate planner met me in the reading room. Glass walls, fireplace glowing, shelves stacked with the cookbooks I'd written, the programs from every Rising Oven Gala, photos of every woman funded under my name. He handed me a pen. "Final confirmation," he said. "Are you ready to lock this in?" I nodded. My last revision. My final will. Matthew was restored. Melanie was excluded entirely, not by default, but by explicit clause. She would receive nothing. Not even a mention. The children, however. Eli and Clara's trust was updated. It would now include full ownership of the Rising Oven flagship location upon turning 30, And after completing a written vision plan, they wouldn't just inherit money. They'd inherit mission. The clause read, "This property and brand are passed not as trophies, but as tools. Build something with it or give it to someone who will." That was legacy. That was what Melanie would never understand, because she spent her life coveting rooms where power was performed, while I spent mine building homes where power was baked into the walls. That weekend, I invited Eli and Clara for a sleepover at the estate. We baked mini cinnamon rolls. They made a mess. I didn't care. After dinner, they asked to watch the short documentary a local journalist had made about me. It ended with a shot of me standing in front of the rising oven's main window, the sign glowing behind me, hands dusted with flour. The narrator said, "She never demanded a seat at their table. She built her own, from dough and dignity." Clara looked at me with sleepy eyes and whispered, "Grandma, will I be like you when I'm old?" I smiled. "No, baby. You'll be even bigger." Later that night, when they were asleep, I stood alone in the garden. The moon high, the house quiet. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. This wasn't just the conclusion of a revenge story. This was the beginning of a dynasty. The estate was quiet on the morning of the final announcement. My foundation was about to go international. 3 new rising oven branches, Toronto, Dublin, and Cape Town. Each with local mentorship, locally sourced ingredients, and women who had been told they were too old, too tired, too late. I stood before the cameras, flanked by 2 women in their 70s who'd never flown on a plane before today. They held copies of my book in one hand and their business licenses in the other. The press asked, "What do you hope this expansion proves?" I smiled. It's not about proving anything anymore. It's about building so loud the doubt doesn't even echo. I came home that night to find a note on the front gate. Not from Melanie. From Matthew. Short. Folded. Handwritten. "Thank you for not locking me out forever. Thank you for letting me become better without having to pretend I always was." Underneath it, a drawing. This one from Eli. A house. Labeled, "Our Family's Bakery." 3 stick figures again. Me in the center. Only this time, Clara and Eli stood beside me wearing aprons too. And a banner across the top. "We rise together." I hung it in the entryway, right above the shelf where I kept the original cinnamon swirl recipe. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat at the same wooden stool I once used when I baked in a tiny, silent kitchen back when all I had were aching hands and someone else's insults echoing in my ears. And I wrote a new recipe. Not for bread, but for power. Ingredients. 1 insult strong enough to make you quiet. 1 reason powerful enough to make you rise anyway. 5 heaping cups of patience. 10 ounces of unspoken work. A pinch of vengeance, but sifted carefully. A table you build yourself. Instructions. Bake slowly. Serve warm. Never ask if you're allowed to be there. That was the end of it. Not a bang.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Like and subscribe. Bye bye.